Josephine called my ledger a coloring book. Moments later, it was the reason she signed everything over. The morning I opened the shop for what should have been an ordinary Tuesday, I intended to reconcile $41 in petty cash and steep a pot of the rooibos my regulars liked. By 4 in the afternoon, I was standing on my own sidewalk holding a rezoning notice that told me my lease had, in effect, been legislated out of existence. Those two facts sat side by side in my mind without touching for a long moment, the way two strangers stand at a bus stop. And then they touched, and I understood that Josephine Vance had spent the spring quietly redrawing the boundaries of the world so that my little tea and stationery shop would no longer be permitted to stand inside it. She was already on the sidewalk when I came out, because Josephine was always already there, the way certain kinds of weather are already there. She was the president of the Saguaro Bluffs Homeowners Association. She lived in the sand-colored house immediately to the north of the shop's rear lot line, and she had a manner of speaking to people that suggested she was doing them a favor by using words at all. She looked at the notice in my hand, and then she looked at the thing I was holding in my other hand, which was my ledger, a green, cloth-bound account book with a cracked spine that I carried the way other women carry a phone. And she smiled the way a person smiles at a child's drawing taped to a refrigerator. "You still keep that little coloring book?" she said. "Greta, honey, nobody's audited a shop by hand since the Carter administration. It's almost sweet." It won't help you now, but it's sweet. I want to be precise about the ledger because everything that followed turned on it, and because at that moment on the sidewalk, it truly did look like nothing. A worn green book with a rubber band around it to keep the loose receipts from escaping. Josephine saw a prop from a bygone era. She saw an unsophisticated woman clinging to an unsophisticated habit. She saw, I think, exactly what she wanted to see, which was someone beneath her notice. And that was the single most expensive assumption she ever made, though neither of us knew it yet as we stood in the flat white light with the rezoning notice between us like a served subpoena. I did not tell her what the ledger actually contained. I had learned over 38 years and one difficult pregnancy that was now in its 26th week that the things you say out loud become things other people can prepare for. And I had already decided, standing there, one hand pressed to the small, firm curve of my belly where my daughter had begun that week to answer pressure with a kick, that I was not going to give Josephine Vance anything to prepare for. To understand why that green book mattered so much and why a rezoning notice landed on me like a verdict, you have to go back 11 years to the winter I bought it. I was 27 then, and I had just finished a 14-hour shift in the emergency department at Banner Desert. And I had signed the lease on the shop that same afternoon with ink that was barely dry on my nursing license. People assumed the shop was a hobby, a soft second thing a nurse did on her days off, and I let them assume it, because the truth was less romantic, and I was tired of explaining it. The truth was that I had grown up watching my grandmother, Ada Hargrove, run a fabric and notions store in Tucson for 31 years, and I had watched her keep that store alive through 2 recessions and 1 flood on the strength of exactly 1 instrument, which was a book like this one, in which she wrote down every single thing. Ada did not trust banks to remember, and she did not trust the state to be fair, and she did not trust a handshake to survive a bad year. What she trusted was the record. "Write it down the day it happens," she told me, more than once, standing at her cutting table with a pencil behind her ear and a tape measure around her neck like a preacher's stole. "And write down the thing you think doesn't matter, because that's the thing that matters." When she closed the store in 2009, not because she failed, but because her hands finally failed her, she gave me the newest of her ledgers, still mostly blank, and she said, "Start where I stopped." I bought a rubber band for it on the drive home, and I have used the same book ever since. So when Josephine called it a coloring book, she was not insulting a book. She was insulting Ada, and the 31 years, and the flood, and the pencil behind the ear, and she did it in the flat, amused voice of a woman who had never once in her life had to write down the things she thought didn't matter, because nothing had ever cost her anything. I opened the shop, which I named Marigold and Vellum, in the spring of 2014 in a small commercial strip on the eastern edge of the Saguaro Bluffs development, 20 minutes northeast of Phoenix. It was 1,100 square feet, and it sold loose tea, letterpress cards, fountain pens, and the kind of good paper you cannot buy at a chain store. And for the first several years, it lost money slowly, and then, around 2019, it began to make money slowly. By the time this all happened, it cleared a modest but real profit, enough that I had, without telling my husband Daniel, begun setting aside money in an account that only I could see, because Ada had also taught me that a woman should always have a door she can walk through by herself. Daniel. I have to tell you about Daniel, because he is part of the shape of the year, and because his part is not the part you expect. I married Daniel Osei in 2016. He was a civil engineer, warm and easily impressed by other people's confidence. And for most of our marriage, he was a good and ordinary man. But confidence was his weakness, and Josephine Vance was made of nothing else. And somewhere around the second year that she was HOA president, Daniel began to admire her. It was not, at first, the kind of admiration that has a woman's name on it. It was the admiration of a man who wanted to be near power and mistook Josephine's contempt for the world for strength. He started attending the HOA meetings. He started saying, "Josephine thinks," the way some men say, "the doctor says." I noticed, and I wrote it down. Not in the ledger, which was for the shop, but I noticed the way I notice a patient's color changing before the monitor catches up. Now let me bring the erosion forward, because it did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way water gets into a foundation, in a season of small wrongs that each looked, on its own, like nothing worth the ledger. The first was the parking. In September of 2023, the HOA passed a resolution restricting the commercial strip's shared lot to residents only after 6 in the evening, which sounds reasonable until you know that my letterpress class met on Thursday evenings, and my students, who came from across the valley, now had nowhere to leave their cars. I lost the class. 11 students, $40 a head, every week. I wrote the loss down in the Green Book on the 12th of September, and next to it I wrote the resolution number, because Ada's voice in my head said, "Write down the thing you think doesn't matter," and a resolution number felt like exactly the kind of thing that didn't matter. The second was the sign. My hand-painted marigold sign, which a local artist named Priya Raman had made for me for the cost of a year's free tea, was cited in October as being inconsistent with the community aesthetic standard, a standard that had been passed, I later confirmed, 4 days before the citation. I repainted the sign in the approved Sand and Sage palette, which cost $210, and I wrote that down too, along with the citation number and the date of the standard, and the small, ugly fact that the standard had been created to catch a sign that already existed. The third was Roberta. Roberta Klein ran the boutique 2 doors down from mine, a shop of overpriced candles and throw pillows, and she and Josephine were close, in the way that people are close when one of them has power and the other one has the good sense to flatter it. In November, Roberta's shop was granted a variance to expand into the vacant unit between us, the unit I had been quietly negotiating to take over for a stockroom, a negotiation the landlord's daughter had described to me as basically done. Roberta got it in 9 days. I found out when the drywall crew arrived. I wrote that down as well, and I did something I had not done before, which was to note the exact language of the variance, because it referenced a consolidated commercial use plan that I had never heard of, and that, it turned out, existed. That was the fourth thing, and it was not really a fourth thing so much as the shape of the first 3 finally becoming visible. In December, I requested, as I was entitled to under Arizona's open meeting statute, the minutes and materials of the HOA's planning committee, and buried in a 40-page packet, I found a phrase that made me sit down at my own counter and hold the edge of it. The committee had been developing, since the previous spring, a rezoning proposal that would reclassify the entire commercial strip from mixed use to residential-adjacent low-impact retail, a category so narrow that it permitted candles and pillows and coffee, but specifically excluded instructional or workshop-based enterprises and businesses generating regular, non-resident foot traffic. It excluded, in other words, me. It had been written to fit around Roberta and to strangle me, and it had Josephine's name on the cover memo and Daniel's signature on the resident support form. I want to be honest about what that did to me, because I am not the kind of woman who floats above her own life. I stood in my shop, 6 months pregnant, and I felt the specific heat that I feel maybe twice a year, the heat that in the emergency department I have learned to walk through rather than around. And I put both hands flat on the counter, and I breathed until the marigold I could see out the window stopped shimmering. My daughter kicked, once, low and certain. And then I did the thing Ada trained into me before I trusted the banks or the state or the handshake. I wrote it down. Date, packet page number, the exact excluding language, Daniel's signature, all of it, in the green book, in pencil, the day it happened. The rezoning passed at the HOA level in January and was forwarded to the county for the required review. And Josephine, who did not yet know that I had read the packet, treated me through all of it with the cheerful cruelty of someone who has already won. She would wave at me across the fence line between our lots when I came out to the small back garden behind the shop, a fenced patch of decomposed granite where I grew Mexican honeysuckle and kept a single lemon tree in a half barrel. And she would call out things that were designed to sound like kindness. "You'll land on your feet, Greta. Girls like you always do. Have you thought about doing this from home? So much less stress in your condition." She said "in your condition" the way another woman might say, "given your record." The rezoning notice that landed in April, the one I was holding on the sidewalk, was the county's public notice of the pending change, the thing that made it real and imminent and mine to fight or accept. And it was on that sidewalk, with the notice in one hand and Ada's book in the other, that Josephine called it a coloring book, and I decided what I was going to do. Here is the part Josephine never once considered, because it did not occur to her that a woman who kept accounts by hand could be doing anything but keeping accounts by hand. For 3 years, in the evenings after Marigold and Vellum closed, and before Daniel came home from whatever meeting he was attending, I had been studying, not tea and not paper. I had been studying for, and had in the previous October passed, the Arizona examination to become a licensed public accountant, a CPA. I did not do it because I planned any of this. I did it because Ada's book had taught me to love the architecture of money, the way a nurse learns to love the architecture of the body, and because I wanted, when my daughter was old enough to ask what her mother did, to have more than one true answer. I told no one. I passed all 4 sections on the first attempt, which the proctor told me almost no one does, and I let the certificate sit in a drawer under the register, and I went on selling tea. That is the plain sentence, and I will say it the way the brief of my own life would say it. I was a licensed CPA, and the woman who had rewritten the zoning code to erase me had no idea. My ledger was not a coloring book. It was the working paper of someone qualified under the laws of the state to read the ledgers of other people and to say, under professional oath, whether they told the truth. And Josephine Vance kept a second set of books. I did not know that yet, on the sidewalk. I learned it in the weeks after, and I learned it the way you learn anything real, which is by looking at the thing you think doesn't matter. The HOA's finances were public to members, in summary form, and I was a member. In February, I had requested the association's full financial records for the prior 3 years, again under the open meeting and homeowner inspection statutes. And Josephine had provided them, with the lazy contempt of a woman who assumed no one who received them could read them. She was almost right. Almost. What she handed over was a set of clean, plausible summaries, the operating statements she presented at meetings, showing dues collected, reserves maintained, vendors paid. And I sat at my kitchen table for 4 nights with those summaries and Ada's green book open beside them, and I did the only thing I truly know how to do, which is to write down what I see and cross-check it against what should be there. The reserves did not reconcile. Not by a little. The association collected $241 per household per month from 306 households, which is roughly $885,000 a year. And the reserve fund, the money legally required to be held for major repairs, was reported at $412,000. And yet the bank statements Josephine had, carelessly included in the packet, showed a reserve account balance of $109,000. The gap was $303,000, and it had a shape because I traced it, line by line, the way Ada traced a bolt of fabric to the yard. And the shape was a series of payments to a vendor called Keystone Analytics for community data and compliance services. Keystone Analytics, I found in 20 minutes at the county recorder's office, was an Arizona LLC formed in 2021, and its registered agent and sole member was Josephine Vance. She had rezoned the strip to push me out, yes, but that was the small crime, the one I could see. The large crime was that Josephine had been routing the association's reserves through a company she owned, dressing theft as consulting. And the rezoning was not only spite, it was cover. Because a business owner who kept careful records and asked careful questions was a threat to a scheme that depended on no one reading the second set of books. I was not being erased because I was inconvenient. I was being erased because I was, without either of us fully knowing it, dangerous. I did not go to Josephine. I did not go to Daniel. I went to Karen. Karen Ashby had been my grandmother's attorney's daughter, and she was now my attorney. And she was the kind of lawyer who returned calls at 9 at night and read documents the way I read a patient's chart, looking for the thing that would kill you if you missed it. I brought her the green book and the summaries and the bank statements and my own reconciliation, 40 pages of it in pencil. And Karen read it all without speaking. And when she finished, she took off her reading glasses and she said, the only thing I have ever wanted a colleague to say, which was, "This is clean work, Greta. This would stand up." Then she said the thing that mattered more. "You're a CPA. That changes what this is. If you sign a reconciliation like this, you're not a homeowner with a complaint. You're an expert with a report." She let that sit. The Board of Accountancy and the county's HOA regulator will both take a filing from you that they'd throw away from me. We built it slowly, over 5 weeks, because I would not hand anyone a thing that could be picked apart, and because I was, by then, 31 weeks pregnant and physically incapable of hurrying. We assembled the reconciliation as a formal report. We gathered the Keystone filings, the invoices, the canceled checks, the meeting minutes where Josephine had reported reserve balances that her own bank statements contradicted. Karen prepared the complaint for the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which regulates HOAs, and a parallel referral to the county attorney's Economic Crimes Unit. And I did one more thing, which was mine alone. I went home and I told Daniel I wanted a divorce. I had thought that would be the hard scene, and it was hard, but not the way I expected. I did not rage at him. I sat him down at the same kitchen table where I had done the reconciliation, and I laid it out for him. The reserves, Keystone, his signature on the resident support form, the whole architecture of what his admiration had made him complicit in. And I watched a man understand in real time that the strength he had been standing next to was a woman stealing $300,000 from her neighbors. He did not defend her. That was the mercy and the tragedy of Daniel. He had no real convictions, so he had nothing to defend. He asked me quietly, whether I had known when I married him that he was weak. I told him the truth, which was that I had not, and that I had found out the same way I found out everything, by watching, and by the time I was sure it was too late to be surprised. We agreed to divorce without a fight, and here is where Ada's other lesson, the door you can walk through by yourself, turned out to have built the whole house. Because I had kept my own accounts, because the shop's money and my separate savings were documented to the dollar, because I could show exactly what was mine and what was ours, there was nothing to litigate. Karen said she had never seen a marital estate untangle so fast. I kept the shop, the separate account, the green book, and the lemon tree. Daniel kept the sand-colored gilt and moved to a rental in Chandler. I did not hate him. I have found that hating the weak is like being angry at water for being wet. The reckoning came on a Saturday in the middle of May in the back garden behind my shop, and it came the way I had arranged it, which was quietly and without a single raised voice. I had learned that the Department of Real Estate had assigned my complaint to a compliance investigator named Marcus Delgado, and that Mr. Delgado intended to interview the HOA board members in person. And I had learned, because Roberta, of all people, let it slip while buying tea she thought would soften me, that Josephine planned to host the board and the investigator for what she called an informal walkthrough of the community, starting, she had decided, in the shared open space that ran behind our two lots, the strip of desert garden where our fence lines met. She meant to control the setting the way she controlled everything, to serve iced hibiscus and stand on her own decomposed granite and be, as ever, already there. So I was in my back garden that Saturday morning, watering the lemon tree in the half barrel, when Josephine brought them through the gate. Marcus Delgado in a gray suit that was too warm for May, 2 board members trailing him, and Roberta bringing up the rear with a tray. Josephine was in full flight, narrating the community's virtues, gesturing at the xeriscaping, and when she saw me, she paused only long enough to perform generosity. "That's Greta," she told Mr. Delgado with a small laugh. "My neighbor. She runs the little tea shop we've been so worried about. Bless her, she keeps her books in a notebook." She said notebook, the way she had said coloring book, and Roberta laughed on cue, and I understood that Josephine had brought them past my fence specifically so that I would witness her ease. I set down the watering can. I picked up the green ledger from the garden table where I had, quite deliberately, left it, and I walked to the gap in the fence and I said, "Mr. Delgado, before you begin, I have a document for you." I handed him not the ledger, but the sealed folder that had been sitting beneath it, the signed reconciliation report, the Keystone filings, the bank statements, the whole clean architecture Karen and I had built. "My name is Greta Hargrove," I said, "and I'm a licensed CPA in the state of Arizona, certificate number posted on the cover page. That report is a full reconciliation of this association's reserve accounts for the last 3 fiscal years. You'll find a shortfall of $303,000, and you'll find where it went. I've also filed it with your department and referred it to the county attorney. I kept a second copy for you here, so you'd have it before the walkthrough, in case the walkthrough was meant to be the whole story. I will not tell you that Josephine turned some dramatic color, because she did not. She was not built to lose in public, and she did not have the equipment for it. What happened was quieter, and to me, far more satisfying to have witnessed. She kept talking. For perhaps 8 seconds, she kept narrating the garden. And the honeysuckle here is drought native, so you can see the board's commitment, as if she could out-talk a bound report in a federal investigator's hands. And then Mr. Delgado opened the folder and read the cover page and the first reconciliation table. And he stopped writing in his own little notebook. And he looked up at her, and Josephine's sentence simply ran out of road. She did not finish it. She stood in her own garden with an iced hibiscus in her hand and understood that the setting she had chosen to control had become the setting in which she was cornered, and the thing that cornered her was the coloring book. Mr. Delgado was a careful man. He did not accuse anyone in a garden. He closed the folder and he said, "Ms. Vance, I think we'll need to reschedule the walkthrough. I'll be in touch with the full board and with counsel." And Josephine, who had never, in the years I knew her, been at a loss for a cutting word, said only, "Of course," in a voice that had gone flat and administrative, the voice of someone already talking to her lawyer in her head. She looked at me then, across the fence line, and she looked at the green book in my hand, and I watched her recalculate every conversation we had ever had, every honey and every "in your condition," and arrive at the understanding that she had spent a year and a half being contemptuous of the one person on the block qualified to read her lies. She did not apologize. Women like Josephine do not apologize. Apology requires believing the other person is real. But something in her posture changed permanently that morning. A settling, the way a house settles after the ground shifts under it, and it never came back up. What followed took months, and I will give it to you briefly, because the drama had already happened in the garden, and the rest was only consequence arriving on schedule. The Department of Real Estate found the shortfall exactly as I had documented it. The county attorney's economic crimes unit accepted the referral. Josephine was removed as HOA president by an emergency vote of the very neighbors she had robbed, and Keystone Analytics was dissolved, and a repayment order followed that I understand she is still meeting in installments. The rezoning, which had been built partly to cover her, collapsed under scrutiny when Karen demonstrated that the proposal's chief architect was under investigation for defrauding the same association. The county declined to certify it, and the commercial strip stayed mixed use, and Marigold and Vellum kept its lease. I did not stay to watch all of it. That is the part I most want you to understand, because I think the version of me that Josephine imagined, the vengeful little shopkeeper, would have pulled up a chair and watched Josephine burn. But that was never what I was after. I had wanted one thing, which was to be free. Free of the erasure, free of the marriage, free of the long habit of being underestimated by people who mistook my quiet for weakness. Josephine's ruin was not my victory. My victory was that I walked out of all of it whole, with my shop and my daughter and my grandmother's book, and I owed no one an explanation. My daughter was born in July, 3 weeks after the garden, in the same hospital where I had signed my nursing license 11 years before. I named her Ada. She was 7 pounds and 1 ounce and furious about the light, and I held her in the recovery room, and I thought about the woman she was named for, the pencil behind the ear, write down the thing you think doesn't matter. And I understood that the whole of it, the shop, the CPA exam I took in the dark, the reconciliation in pencil, the door I could walk through by myself, had all come out of one book and one old woman's refusal to trust anything but the record. I reopened the letterpress class in September once the parking resolution was quietly repealed by the new board. Priya Raman repainted the Marigold sign, and I hung the original hand-painted one, the non-compliant one, inside the shop above the register, where it belongs. I keep the green ledger there still, on the shelf beneath it, though I do most of the shop's accounting now on a proper system, because I am, after all, a CPA. But I write the important things down by hand first, the day they happen, in pencil, because some records need to exist in a form that no one can quietly amend at midnight. I saw Josephine one more time that mattered, in October, at the community mailboxes. She was smaller than I remembered, though she had not physically changed. It was that the space she used to take up had been withdrawn from her, the way a lease is withdrawn. She was collecting her mail, and she saw me with Ada in the carrier against my chest, and for a moment the old contempt tried to organize her face into its familiar shape. It could not hold. She managed to nod, tight and joyless, the nod of a woman who now knows exactly how much she once misjudged and will spend the rest of her time on this block being reminded of it by the sight of me. I nodded back, without warmth and without cruelty, the way you acknowledge whether you no longer have to live under. Then I did the thing I had promised myself in the garden that I would do if I won, which was a small thing and a generous one. I had learned that the association's reserve shortfall meant the community pool would go unrepaired for a season, a hardship for the families with young children, none of whom had stolen anything. So I paid, anonymously through Karen, for the pool's replastering, $11,000 out of the separate account Ada taught me to keep. I never told anyone, and I am only telling you now because the money is the point. I had it because I had kept my own record, and I gave it because keeping a record is finally about being able to answer, when your daughter is old enough to ask, what kind of woman you were. I adjusted Ada in her carrier, and I felt her weight settle warm against me, and I walked back to my shop past the fence where Josephine had once called out that girls like me always land on our feet. She had been right about that, though not in the way she meant. I unlocked Marigold and Vellum, and I put the kettle on for the rooibos, and I opened the green book to a clean page and wrote the date and the pool and the $11,000, and beside it, because Ada would have wanted it recorded, and because it was the truest line of the whole 11 years, I wrote, "Paid in full," and turned the page.